We are back. Rand Paul and the word plagiarism made it into another headline recently, but not in the way you think. It turns out that the Libertarian Republican and likely 2016 candidate has been a victim of plagiarism by other Republicans around the country, and not just once. BuzzFeed has found at least 8 candidates, including 2 Senate contenders, who have pretty blatantly ripped off the freshman Kentucky senator. For example, T.W. Shannon, a Senate candidate in Oklahoma, seems to have used very similar language to Paul when writing about the Department of Education. Here's what Rand Paul wrote on his website, quote, "More money, more bureaucracy, and more government intervention are eroding this nation's educational standards." And here's what Shannon wrote, quote, "More money, more bureaucracy, and more government intervention have eroded educational standards." Another example. Here's Rand Paul's language on the topic of incumbency. Quote, "Long-term incumbency leads to politicians who seem to care more about what is best for their career than what is best for their country." And here's what Michael Dreichorn, who's running to replace Congressman Trey Radel in Florida, wrote, quote, "Long-term incumbency leads to politicians who seem to care more about what is best for their career than what is best for America." The list goes on and on and on. Gun control, abortion, energy, education, and more. According to BuzzFeed, at least 2 politicians simply copied Rand Paul's entire issue section from his website. So what does all this say about Paul's place in the Republican Party? After all, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And you don't see too many candidates copying verbatim off Jeb Bush's homework. Ken Vogel is chief investigative reporter for Politico, and Robert Costa is a reporter for the Washington Post. Okay, Robert, I'm going to start with you. What does it say about the Republican Party that people are cheating off Rand Paul?
I think it says a lot about Senator Paul's ascendancy within the Republican Party. If you're a Senate primary Republican running a Republican Senate primary and you're looking to fill up your issues page, it makes sense for you to go to someone like Senator Paul's website for information because he has an edge to a lot of his ideological positions. It's a little different tone, a different way of phrasing things than the usual Republican position that would be on the RNC's website or John Boehner's website.
So, I mean, Ken, big picture, is Rand Paul more in step with the base of the Republican Party at this point than the establishment Republicans, people like Jeb Bush, people even like Rick Perry?
Yeah, absolutely, Joanna. You see it in the types of folks who are copying from him. Greg Brannon is a good example down in North Carolina. He is the Tea Party favorite for the GOP nomination to run against Kay Hagan. He's running against an establishment-endorsed guy, Tom Tillis, who's the Speaker of the House of Representatives down there. And it makes sense for Brannon to try to find a way to position himself where he can capture some of that energy that Rand Paul has really tapped into, but not necessarily offend other sort of legs of the conservative stool. And Rand Paul has done a really effective job increasingly of doing that, of being that libertarian sort of Tea Party candidate, but also finding a way to walk this delicate tightrope where he's not offending social conservatives too much or even neocons. He has made some inroads with them. So this is a good blueprint for others to follow.
Well, I mean, you mentioned neocons, and I'm glad you mentioned that three-legged stool in the Republican Party, because to be honest with you, you have some on the right, really among those neocons and hawks, that have made no secret that they absolutely detest Rand Paul, at least on his positions on foreign policy. I'll give you a couple examples. The National Review's Rich Lowry, who wrote, quote, "He will soon be running for an office where your view of the world matters profoundly, and his instincts sometimes seem more appropriate to a dorm room bull session than the Situation Room." You've got the Wall Street Journal, where columnist Bret Stephens wrote, quote, "Let's not mince words. This man wants to be the Republican nominee for president, and so he should be, because maybe what the GOP needs is another humbling landslide defeat." And let's not forget New York Congressman Peter King. Let's take a listen to him.
I think his views would be disastrous, Joe. I think he appeals to the lowest common denominator. This is an isolationist wing from the 1930s. Rand Paul brings it to this hysterical level. Like, he talks about the CIA trying to kill Americans, having coffee in Starbucks. When he talks about President Obama listening to his cell phone conversations, that to me is just feeding into paranoia. We do need an intelligent debate, and I don't think Rand Paul is capable of having that debate.
So Robert Costa, Ken Vogel says that Rand Paul's gone out of his way to try not to offend the old school neocon wing of the party. But isn't it more accurate to say that what Rand Paul is doing is completely just setting them aside?
I think that's right, Joy. I think Paul is mounting an interesting strategy because he knows that the hawks still control the Republican donor class. They're still the majority there, and the Hawks are still the majority when it comes to the congressional leadership. However, when he goes out to these states that are having these primaries, especially in House races and Senate races, and he senses, I think, Bush fatigue, especially fatigue when it comes to George W. Bush's foreign policy, he's tapping into that, and a lot of his acolytes are doing the same.
Yeah, I mean, isn't this a sign, Ken, that Bush presidency really damaged that mainstream wing of the party, pretty fundamentally? If somebody who was considered fringe, the Paul family, is now in the mainstream, at least Rand Paul of the Republican Party.
Yeah, it shows that the way that the Republican Party has shifted since the Bush presidency, and you're right to set that as the milestone. However, I do think that despite the fact that Rand Paul is in many ways fundamentally opposed to the sort of neocon wing of the party, he has in recent months sort of made at least outreach to some of these folks. Some of them will never accept him, and to his credit, he has not changed his views substantially on these issues, but he has shown that he's willing to listen. Same thing with the social conservatives. He has de-emphasized social issues. He has said that the GOP may have to agree to disagree on social issues. That's cacophonous. That's the worst thing that some of these social conservatives can hear, but some of them are not rejecting him outright, and that's a testament to his ability to sort of walk this tightrope. And I think it will be interesting to see whether he can make some of these folks sort of set aside their concerns as he appears to be positioning himself for a run for the 2016 Republican presidential nomination.
I mean, Robert, is there a concern when you talk to Republicans who work at that operative level that there really is not a clear alternative, really, at this point to Rand Paul, who is, to Ken's point, trying to consolidate all the pieces of that Republican three-legged stool, either by directly reaching out to them or at least by trying not to offend them too much?
I think there is some growing anxiety on the right, especially within the more establishment wing of the party. They expected Governor Christie to fill that slot for the establishment, to be the hawk who could win over the donors and could put together a coalition that looked a lot like George W. Bush's. However, because of the bridge, of course, Christie slipped. And you see others now adjusting to that new reality in Republican politics. The most recent example would be Senator Cruz articulating a Ronald Reagan-esque message when it comes to foreign policy, and actually breaking with his close friend in the Senate, Rand Paul, and they've actually had some tension on foreign policy. So you're seeing someone, whether it's Cruz, maybe Christie comes back, maybe it's Jeb Bush, they're all trying to move toward that Bush model, that Reagan model, while Paul cultivates his own image on foreign policy.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say it. I've said it before. I'll say it again. It is Rand Paul, and it is not Rand Paul, and that's what the Republicans have to deal with. Ken Vogel and Robert Costa, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks,
and we'll be right back.